What do you call a movie that tanked in theaters, confused critics, and somehow came back swinging harder than any blockbuster? You don't just call it a film, you call it a resurrection. These are the movies that prove failure is sometimes just the first step to immortality. Ever wondered why fans obsess over what the box office ignored? Stick around, because the answers are stranger, funnier, and weirder than you think. Donnie Darko, 2001. Released just weeks after 9/11, Donnie Darko didn't stand a chance at the box office. Theaters weren't ready for a gloomy teen drama about time travel, hallucinations, and a guy in a terrifying rabbit suit whispering doom. The film limped along, earning barely a dent compared to its budget. But then the afterlife began, not for Donnie, but for the film itself. What makes Donnie Darko cult royalty is its strange alchemy of suburban angst, philosophical riddles, and a killer soundtrack dripping with moody 80s nostalgia. Jake Gyllenhaal delivers a performance that balances vulnerability with manic intensity, while Richard Kelly's direction weaves together destiny, mental illness, and paranoia in a way that feels like half prophecy, half fevered dream. At the center is Frank, the grotesque rabbit who became an icon in posters, Halloween costumes, and countless dorm room walls. The movie's second life exploded through midnight screenings and DVD sales, where word of mouth turned confusion into devotion. Fans treated it like scripture, debating whether Donnie was chosen, cursed, or both. Every ambiguous ending frame and every cryptic line became fuel for forums and late-night conversations. And then there's the soundtrack, capped by Gary Jules' haunting cover of Mad World, which cemented the film's status as more than cinema. It was a shared emotional experience. In theaters, Donnie Darko flopped. In culture, it thrived. Sometimes the biggest box office failure can turn into the most whispered-about legend. That's cult status, baby. Brazil, 1985. If George Orwell wrote comedy sketches after a nervous breakdown, you'd get Brazil. Terry Gilliam's nightmare vision of a bureaucratic future was too weird for Hollywood and too bleak for mainstream audiences. Studio executives panicked, hacked the film apart, and tried to force a happy ending. Gilliam fought back, even taking out full-page ads in Variety, begging for his version to be released. The result? A film that practically defines the cult battle cry, misunderstood, mistreated, and eventually victorious. Jonathan Pryce plays Sam Lowry, a low-level worker drowning in a society choked by paperwork, machines, and errors that kill people as casually as typos. The world is both hilarious and horrifying. Ductwork clogs every room, computers sputter like dying appliances, and a single clerical mistake sets off a chain of destruction. The cast, featuring Robert De Niro as a renegade repairman, adds surreal energy to Gilliam's dream logic. But it's the film's vision, equal parts comedy and despair, that split audiences. Too grim for some, too absurd for others, it didn't clean up at the box office. But over time, fans embraced its messiness as genius. Bootleg VHS copies of Gilliam's cut circulated like contraband until the Love Conquers All studio version was eventually dethroned. Today, Brazil is not just a film, it's a monument to artistic rebellion. Fans revere it as proof that fighting the system, even the studio system, can make legends out of losers. Eraserhead, 1977. Imagine your worst dream. Now imagine living inside it for 90 minutes. That's Eraserhead, David Lynch's first feature, a surreal black-and-white descent into industrial landscapes, mutant babies, and the sound design equivalent of a panic attack. At release, audiences didn't know what hit them. Was it horror? Comedy? Something in between? Theaters barely touched it, but midnight audiences devoured it like contraband. Shot over 5 painstaking years, mostly funded by grants and odd jobs, Eraserhead doesn't follow a plot so much as it drags you through a state of mind. Jack Nance's wide-eyed performance as Henry, a man trapped between domestic responsibility and nightmarish visions, is equal parts tragic and bizarre. The infamous baby, part puppet, part mystery, remains one of cinema's most unsettling creations, inspiring decades of rumors about how Lynch even built the thing. What made Eraserhead a cult treasure wasn't box office appeal, but its ability to burrow into your brain and never leave. Midnight screenings turned it into a ritual. Fans watched and rewatched, quoting lines, speculating on meanings, and dragging their friends into the abyss. Lynch himself called it his most spiritual film, though fans mostly described it as unforgettable, disturbing, and strangely hypnotic. By the end, Eraserhead transformed Lynch from an unknown dreamer into a cinematic prophet of the weird. Every auteur who ever got labeled too strange for Hollywood owes a debt to this little nightmare that could. Box office? Forget it. Legacy? Untouchable. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, 1998. When Terry Gilliam adapts Hunter S. Thompson's hallucinatory novel, you don't get a box office hit, you get an experience. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas staggered into theaters with Johnny Depp as journalist Raul Duke and Benicio del Toro as his partner Dr. Gonzo, drowning in a sea of drugs, paranoia, and neon. Critics trashed it, audiences avoided it, and the film barely made back a fraction of its budget. But cult films aren't about box office receipts. They're about staying power, and this film's chaotic energy ensured it stuck around. Depp channels Thompson with manic energy, muttering through cigarette holders and wide-eyed rants. The film doesn't just depict a trip. It feels like one, pulling the viewer into a whirlpool of distorted hotel rooms, lizard people hallucinations, and rants about the death of the American dream. On release, critics dismissed it as incoherent. Fans saw brilliance hiding in the madness, the surreal cinematography, relentless dialogue, and sheer commitment to chaos turned the movie into a rite of passage. Dorm rooms lit up with posters of Depp in his iconic bucket hat, while midnight screenings kept the movie alive for a new generation eager to ride the wave. Today, Fear and Loathing is studied as one of the ultimate cult oddities, a failed release that became a Bible for fans of Hunter S. Thompson and the counterculture he inspired. It didn't make money, but it made history. The Room 2003. Sometimes a movie becomes a cult classic, not because it's good, but because it's so defiantly bad that people fall in love with it anyway. The Room, written, directed, and starred in by Tommy Wiseau, is the crown jewel of this phenomenon. On paper, it was meant to be a searing drama about betrayal and love. On screen, it turned into an unintentional comedy so bizarre that fans couldn't stop quoting it. At its limited release, The Room was ignored, mocked, or walked out of. But word spread. Audiences started attending midnight screenings, not to mock quietly, but to interact loudly. They threw spoons at the screen, yelled responses to awkward dialogue, and treated the film like a comedy show where everyone was in on the joke, except perhaps Wiseau himself. What gives The Room its cult power is its sincerity. Wiseau clearly believed he was making a masterpiece, and that sheer commitment to every awkward scene and inexplicable plotline created something uniquely magnetic. It's not just so bad it's good, it's so sincere, it's unforgettable. Today, The Room is screened worldwide with rowdy audiences turning every showing into a party. It inspired books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood retelling in The Disaster Artist. Box office? Non-existent. But legacy? Legendary? It's proof that sometimes the best cult classics aren't the ones that succeed. They're the ones that fail so spectacularly, they become immortal. Hedwig and the Angry Inch, 2001. When Hedwig and the Angry Inch debuted in 2001, mainstream audiences barely blinked. A low-budget rock musical about a gender-bending punk singer and her tragic, hilarious journey didn't exactly scream box office gold. But that's the thing about cult films. They don't scream for everyone. They whisper to the right people. John Cameron Mitchell, who also starred as Hedwig, transformed his off-Broadway show into a film that oozed raw energy. Hedwig's songs, blending glam rock with punk attitude, weren't just catchy. They were anthems of identity, longing, and survival. The plot, about Hedwig chasing fame and confronting betrayal while fronting a ramshackle band, mixes biting humor with heartbreaking vulnerability. Critics admired the audacity, but theaters barely filled. Yet in art houses and college towns, audiences latched onto Hedwig's story like it was written just for them. Midnight screenings became sing-alongs with fans belting out Origin of Love and Wig in a Box as if they were rock hymns. Hedwig herself became more than a character. She became a symbol of self-expression for outsiders who rarely saw themselves reflected on screen. The cult legacy here is undeniable. What flopped in theaters transformed into a touchstone for music fans, theater kids, and anyone who felt like a misfit looking for their anthem. Today, Hedwig is celebrated not just as a film, but as a movement, a reminder that the loudest voices aren't always box office winners. Sometimes the true rock stars are born in the shadows. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World 2010. When Edgar Wright adapted Brian Lee O'Malley's graphic novels into Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, he didn't make a normal movie. He made a video game, a comic book, and a love story smashed together in hyper-speed editing. It was brilliant, inventive, and loaded with references. And theaters shrugged. The film barely made half its budget back. Michael Cera plays Scott, a Toronto slacker who must battle his new girlfriend's 7 evil exes in increasingly surreal, video game-inspired duels. Wright fills every frame with energy. Comic book panels flash on screen, sound effects explode like in a retro arcade, and characters toss off deadpan one-liners while fighting like superheroes. On release, critics praised the invention, but audiences didn't know what to do with it. Too geeky for some, too niche for others, it stumbled hard at the box office. But when the DVD dropped, the real fight began. Fans who grew up on comics, indie music, and gaming latched onto it as their cinematic Bible. Quotes like, "Bread makes you fat," and the dazzling battles against exes became instant meme culture. Midnight screenings packed with costume fans helped cement its new life. What makes Scott Pilgrim cult canon isn't just style, it's sincerity. Beneath the flashy visuals is a heartfelt story about love, insecurity, and self-respect. That combination, goofy, stylish, and oddly wise, turned a financial flop into a generational cult favorite. Today, if you mention the film, someone nearby will hum Black Sheep or shout, "You punched the highlights out of her hair." That's cult power. Blade Runner, 1982. Imagine being laughed out of theaters by E.T. That's what happened to Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. Released in 1982, the same year audiences wanted heartwarming aliens, Scott delivered a rain-soaked dystopia of synthetic humans, neon nightmares, and existential dread. Critics called it slow and confusing. The box office numbers were worse, but in failure, Blade Runner found eternity. Harrison Ford plays Deckard, a weary cop hunting rogue replicants in a future Los Angeles that looks more like a nightmare than a dream. Rutger Hauer's performance as Roy Batty, capped by his legendary Tears in Rain speech, elevated the film from sci-fi noir to tragic poetry. Theatrical audiences dismissed it, but VHS and later director's cuts resurrected the film's reputation. Each new version pulled more fans into debate. Was Deckard himself a replicant? Was the unicorn dream a clue? The very confusion that hurt it in theaters became its strongest cult weapon, sparking decades of analysis, essays, and fandom devotion. Today, Blade Runner is hailed as one of the most influential sci-fi films ever made, inspiring everything from The Matrix to Ghost in the Shell. Its initial flop almost buried it, but the cult revival turned it into a classic. Sometimes the future just needs a little time to catch up. Office Space, 1999. Nobody showed up for Office Space when it premiered in 1999. Audiences didn't rush to see a comedy about cubicles, TPS reports, and soul-crushing corporate monotony. The studio didn't even know how to market it. But slowly, one DVD at a time, it became the ultimate workplace anthem. Mike Judge's satire follows Peter, played by Ron Livingston, as he drifts through a mind-numbing tech job until he decides to stop caring altogether. Along the way, he and his friends plot revenge against their company's endless bureaucracy, leading to printer-smashing, hypnotic detachment, and some of the most quotable office jokes in history. Theatrical audiences weren't impressed, but once it hit home video, Office Space spread like wildfire. Suddenly, cubicle workers were quoting Milton's obsession with his stapler and repeating "Case of the Mondays" like gospel. Every office drone who felt suffocated by fluorescent lights and middle managers found their reflection in Judge's humor. What makes Office Space cult royalty isn't just laughs. It's truth. The film captures corporate absurdity so perfectly that it became a survival tool. Fans didn't just watch it, they lived it, passing around VHS tapes like contraband in the break room. Today, it's one of the most quoted comedies of all time, a cult gem that turned workplace misery into cathartic comedy. Box office failure? Sure. But ask anyone who's ever worked in a cubicle, this movie is their anthem. Fight Club, 1999. On release, Fight Club was a disaster. Critics were split, theaters half empty, and executives panicked about its violent, anarchic tone. But while mainstream audiences recoiled, an underground movement began. By the time the DVD arrived, the film had mutated into a phenomenon. Edward Norton plays the unnamed narrator, a man suffocating in consumer culture who finds release through underground fighting, and his chaotic partner, Tyler Durden, played with swaggering menace by Brad Pitt. What starts as bare-knuckle rebellion spirals into a critique of modern emptiness, corporate chains, and identity itself. The studio didn't know how to market it, and the box office proved them right. But in living rooms, college campuses, and dorm rooms, fans turned Fight Club into a shared language. Posters adorned walls, quotes were traded like currency, and Tyler Durden became a cult anti-hero. What makes it cult canon isn't just its rebellion, it's its paradox. Fans argued about whether it was satire, philosophy, or simply chaos dressed up in leather jackets. The confusion became obsession. By the mid-2000s, the film was revered as one of the most important of its era, despite bombing initially. It didn't win with numbers, but it conquered with loyalty. And in the world of cult cinema, loyalty is worth more than millions. Napoleon Dynamite, 2004. When Napoleon Dynamite hit theaters, it felt like a small, awkward high school project that wandered onto the big screen by mistake. Shot on a shoestring budget in Idaho, starring mostly unknown actors and loaded with deadpan humor, it didn't seem like box office material. And initially, it wasn't. But word spread, and slowly, audiences realized they'd stumbled into something unforgettable. John Heater's performance as Napoleon, a socially awkward teen armed with moon boots, tetherball skills, and endless one-liners, struck a chord. His world is full of quirky characters, Uncle Rico living in the past, Kip chatting online endlessly, and Pedro running for class president. The comedy doesn't come from punchlines, but from the strange rhythm of small-town life. It's painfully awkward, endlessly quotable, and weirdly endearing. On paper, it shouldn't have worked. But when fans discovered it on DVD and cable, it snowballed into a phenomenon. Suddenly, Vote for Pedro shirts were everywhere, and quotes like, "Gosh," or "Tina, you fat lard, come get some dinner," were repeated in hallways and offices across America. It was the cult takeover of the mainstream, proof that even the strangest little indie could change pop culture. Napoleon Dynamite didn't need a big budget or a traditional story arc. It just needed to be itself, unapologetically odd. That honesty is why fans embraced it, transforming a modest flop into one of the most beloved cult comedies of the 2000s. The Big Lebowski, 1998. When the Coen brothers released The Big Lebowski, critics were baffled, audiences stayed away, and the box office was underwhelming. A rambling story about a stoner bowler getting caught up in a kidnapping scheme didn't exactly scream hit material. But years later, this failure became one of the most quoted, most beloved cult films of all time. Jeff Bridges says the dude is the heart of it all. His laid-back philosophy, love of bowling, and endless white Russians made him a counterculture hero. Surrounded by John Goodman's volcanic Walter and Steve Buscemi's timid Donnie, the trio bumbles through a Los Angeles noir plot that never really cares about making sense. And that's the point. It's about the vibe, not the mystery. Theaters didn't get it, but midnight screenings did. Fans embraced the movie's humor, its quotable dialogue, and its sense of chaotic zen. The Dude Abides became a mantra. Conventions like Lebowski Fest popped up, where thousands dressed up, bowled, and quoted lines in unison. What began as a flop became a lifestyle. The Big Lebowski didn't conquer with box office receipts. It conquered with personality. The Dude didn't just abide, he thrived, proving that cult power can turn the strangest character into an icon. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. 1988. If you pitched Killer Clowns from Outer Space in a boardroom, executives would laugh you out the door. And in 1988, audiences did too. The film tanked. But decades later, its cult following is no joke. This low-budget horror comedy about alien clowns invading Earth became a badge of honor for fans of the bizarre. The premise is gloriously absurd. Grotesque clowns land in a spaceship shaped like a circus tent, trapping victims in cotton candy cocoons and blasting them with popcorn guns. The Chiodo brothers, who directed the film, leaned into the ridiculous with colorful set designs and practical effects that looked equal parts terrifying and cartoonish. At release, critics dismissed it as junk, but VHS resurrected it. Horror fans loved its mix of camp, comedy, and genuine creepiness. Midnight screenings cemented its reputation as a movie that shouldn't work, but somehow does. The costumes and effects became cult treasures, and fans began demanding sequels that, to this day, remain teased but unrealized. Killer Clowns from Outer Space didn't earn cult status by being slick or polished. It earned it by being completely unapologetic about its absurdity. And in the world of cult films, that's the ultimate winning hand. Death Race 2019-75. Long before high-octane franchises dominated theaters, there was Death Race 2000. Produced by Roger Corman, the king of exploitation cinema, this futuristic racing film flopped on release but became a cult legend for fans who craved over-the-top satire and chaos. Set in a dystopian America, drivers race across the country, earning points for mowing down pedestrians. Yes, you heard that right. Running people over is the goal. David Carradine stars as the masked hero Frankenstein, while a young Sylvester Stallone chews scenery as his rival Machine Gun Joe. The mix of cartoonish violence, absurd politics, and campy costumes made it both shocking and hilarious. Theaters weren't kind, but midnight crowds embraced the madness. It was outrageous, offensive, and utterly unique, everything a cult film should be. Over time, it inspired remakes, reboots, and countless references in video games and TV shows. What was once written off as trash turned into a time capsule of 70s counterculture rebellion. Death Race 2000 didn't just prove cult status is better than box office. It proved that sometimes the trashiest ideas become the most lasting. Withnail and I, 1987. Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann star in Withnail and I, a British dark comedy that barely registered in theaters, but grew into one of the most beloved cult films ever made. At its core, it's about two out-of-work actors who escape to the countryside, only to descend into chaos, drunkenness, and existential despair. What makes it unforgettable is its writing and performances. Grant, in a career-defining role, delivers the endlessly quotable Withnail, a character who's both hilarious and tragic. The film drips with wit, cynicism, and moments of absurd beauty, balancing comedy with genuine melancholy. On release, it didn't make money, but on VHS, it became a Bible for fans of dark humor and British eccentricity. College students in particular embraced it, quoting lines endlessly and turning it into a cult favorite. The final monologue, set against a rain-soaked zoo, transformed Withnail into a tragic icon of wasted potential. Withnail and I isn't just a film. It's an experience, one that feels like both a comedy routine and a farewell letter to youthful dreams. That's why its cult legacy remains untouchable. So, what do these films prove? That money isn't the final word in cinema, obsession is. A flop on paper can become a legend on VHS, DVD, or even midnight screens decades later. From rabbits in hallways to dudes who abide, cult films remind us that the strangest stories often outlast the biggest hits. Which of these is your favorite? Drop it in the comments, and remember, box office fades, but cult never dies.